Welcome to Mr. Disturbing. Tonight, we're plunging into the dark heart of the Appalachians with some truly unsettling true horror stories. That'll keep you up all night. If you're brave enough, smash that like button and subscribe so you don't miss the next descent into fear. My name is Lucas Brandt. I'm 41 years old, originally from Southern Ohio, but I've spent the past 12 years working in Tennessee as a cartographer for the U.S. Geological Survey. My job's not glamorous. It involves a lot of walking, mapping obscure terrain, checking boundary records, verifying elevations. Most of it is data maintenance, but sometimes I'm asked to verify reports of topographical anomalies, places where the land doesn't match what's recorded. It's rare, usually just a clerical error. But last October, I was sent to a spot just east of the Cherokee National Forest, an area near Laurel Bloomery, tucked along the Tennessee-North Carolina border. Officially, it was unnamed, just coordinates. But locals, the few that were still around, called it Dead Notch. I hadn't heard of it. The request was flagged with a time sensitivity note and came with an older folded map marked in red ink. The ridge showed a sinkhole that didn't exist in more recent scans. I was told to confirm whether the depression had filled in, collapsed, or shifted. I was alone. That wasn't unusual. I packed light, GPS, notebook, a drone for aerial photos. I left early, parked on an overgrown access road, and hiked the last 4 miles. The trail was narrow, almost erased by years of moss and fallen leaves. The elevation wasn't extreme, but the ridge felt wrong. The incline was subtle, yet I constantly felt like I was climbing, as if gravity had warped slightly, like the land was tilting beneath my boots. Around noon, I reached the clearing. It wasn't marked by anything obvious. No signposts, no fences, no landmarks. Just a strange, flat depression in the earth. Wide, circular, at least 40 feet across. Trees lined the perimeter in a perfect ring, their trunks bent outward like something had pushed them away from the center. There was no wildlife, no birds, not even the usual bugs swarming in the fall air. Just a deep hush, like the forest was holding its breath. I set up the drone and launched it. Watched the feed on my tablet as it hovered above the clearing. From above, the ground looked darker, smoother, too smooth. I increased altitude. At 120 feet, the live feed froze. Static lines crawled across the screen. Then, without warning, the drone dropped. Straight down, no warning, just a full shutoff. I heard it crash, somewhere out of view. I cursed, marked the location, decided to retrieve it after logging ground data. As I approached the center of the depression, I noticed something odd. The ground didn't feel like soil. It was soft, spongy. I knelt and brushed away the leaves. Beneath them was a layer of fabric, thin, canvas-like, stretched tight over the earth, covered in decades of growth. I cut a corner loose with my knife. Beneath it wasn't dirt, it was wood, planks warped and dark, laid flat like a floor. I tapped them, hollow. I stepped back, my pulse rising. This wasn't a sinkhole, it was built. Something had been constructed here, and then buried, covered, forgotten. I should have called it in. I should have left. But just as I turned, I saw something at the tree line. Not a person. A shape. Gray. Still. Almost blending with the bark. And when I looked back, it was gone. But the trees were different now. They were closer. I hadn't moved, but the ring had tightened. I stared at the trees. They hadn't moved. Not really, but they had. The bend in their trunks seemed sharper now, like they were leaning in. Not just away from the center, but toward me. I looked down again at the wood beneath my boots. It was old, sure, but not rotten. Not soft in the way you'd expect. The planks were firm, dry, the way wood gets when it's been sealed off from air. I walked the circle slowly, brushing more leaves aside. The pattern became clear. The entire depression was a roof, a man-made structure, massive, buried beneath earth and time and stories no one passed down. I marked it all in my notebook, took photos with my backup phone, no signal, no bars, just a low battery icon flickering, even though I had charged it that morning. I bent down, pressed my ear to the wooden surface. No sound, but there was a vibration, faint, rhythmic, low, like a generator or a heartbeat. I stood. I should have left right then, but the trees had grown silent. The sky above looked the same, but it felt later. I checked my watch. 4:26 p.m. It had been just past noon when I got there. I hadn't stopped for more than 30 minutes. The light didn't feel like late afternoon. It felt wrong, like it was coming from the wrong angle, like the sun had slid sideways instead of down. I turned toward the slope where the drone had crashed. That was when I saw it again. The shape. This time, closer. Not hidden in the trees, between them, just far enough to blur. It looked like a person, but the limbs were too long. The arms hung past the knees, the head tilted in the wrong direction. I took one step back, and it mirrored me, shifting slightly, not with motion, but with presence. Like the space it occupied had adjusted itself around it. I didn't blink, but it vanished. Again, no sound, no movement, just gone. I hiked toward the crash site fast, not caring about keeping quiet. The forest was dead silent anyway. I found the drone 30 feet off the slope, split open, battery melted, not drained, melted. The air smelled like rust. I heard the vibration again, this time louder, steady, closer. I turned to leave, but the trees had moved. They weren't where I remembered. The path back was wrong, shifted. There was no wind, no branches swaying, but the entire layout of the clearing had twisted, subtly, just enough to disorient me. I circled wide, following the perimeter, and that's when I found the opening, a square of wood set low into the earth, where the plank roof had split. It hadn't been there before. I would have seen it. It wasn't a hatch. It was a hole, cut out clean like a mouth opening. The vibration was louder now, echoing from inside. I moved closer. The air pouring from it was cold. Not fresh air cold, cave cold. Below I saw a ladder, metal, bolted to stone, not wood, not part of the structure above. I lowered myself in. One rung, then another. Each footstep felt like stepping into thicker air. The walls around me were dry, no moss, no mold, just stone, worn smooth. And then I reached the bottom. A tunnel stretched forward, cut with precision. No support beams, no torch holders. Just stone, smooth, gray, and alive with that low pulse. And ahead, just barely visible in the gloom, were marks on the floor. Not footprints, handprints, dragged deep. I don't know how long I stood at the bottom of that tunnel, staring at those handprints in the stone. They weren't recent. Worn into the surface. Smooth, shallow trails where fingers had been dragged, over and over again. The walls pulsed with that same low rhythm, the thump of something ancient and slow, not mechanical, not alive in the way we understand it, but present. I moved forward without deciding to, boots silent on the stone, the air colder now, heavier like it had weight. The tunnel curved slowly, impossibly long, and each step seemed to take me deeper than the elevation should allow. My GPS was dead. My watch blinked nonsense. The light behind me faded until it was gone. But I didn't notice when that happened. There was no scent, no sound, but the thump. And even that began to fade, replaced by something quieter, sharper, a sound like teeth clicking against glass. The tunnel opened into a chamber, round, high-ceilinged, too large to be underground, and in the center was a pit. Wide, perfect, surrounded by carvings that didn't belong to any language I know, spirals, eyes, trees with roots where the branches should be. I approached slowly. At the edge of the pit, I looked down. It wasn't deep, But it wasn't empty. Something stood there, facing away, motionless. It had no skin. Its form was shaped by outlines in the air, like heat shimmer, like breath in winter. It didn't turn. It didn't move. But I could feel it knew I was there. I stepped back. My boot scraped stone. The thing flickered, its outline tightening, sharpening, its head turning just enough for me to see the shape of its mouth. Not open, not screaming, smiling. And then I was outside, lying on the ridge, covered in dirt, no gear, no bag, just the sound of wind. The sun was setting. My legs ached. I stumbled back to the road over the next 2 hours, got in the truck, drove until I saw lights again. I didn't sleep that night. I didn't speak for days. When I finally charged my phone, there were no photos, no notes. Just one video, taken sometime while I was underground. 30 seconds of black screen. And over it, the sound of someone breathing through water, then whispering. Then a voice that wasn't mine, speaking just one phrase. You walked beneath the skin of the earth. Now it knows your name. I left the USGS the next week. I moved north, changed emails, changed numbers. But last month, someone mailed me a package. No return address. Inside was a stone, smooth, gray, carved with the same spiral from the pit. And wrapped around it was a single piece of old canvas, folded like skin. When I unwrapped it, there was something written on the inside in soot or ash or old blood. It just said, "Come back down." My name is Eric Dillon. I'm 34, and I've lived my whole life in North Carolina, mostly around the western edge, where the Smokies rise up like quiet warnings in the distance. I work as a subcontractor for a private ecological firm that specializes in mapping watershed anomalies, basically tracking how water flows through terrain where it's not supposed to be. And sometimes that takes me to places no one's walked in decades. I usually don't mind that. I like the quiet, the solitude, the sense that I'm in a world that forgot people long ago. But last April I was sent to survey a high-elevation runoff basin that had recently been flagged by satellite imaging, a strange pool formation near the spine of the Unicoi Mountains, too isolated for recreational use, too uniform to be natural, marked only as Basin 2117A in our system. But the old topo maps had a name for it, Raven's Pit. I'd never heard of it. And neither had any of my co-workers, but when I mentioned it to the man at the gas station nearest the trailhead, he stopped moving for a second, like the words had hit a nerve he didn't expect to use anymore, and then he said something I'll never forget. If the water's still, you turn around. I laughed it off at the time, thought it was just local color, mountain talk, but I remembered it later, too late, when the stillness made sense. I started the hike early before dawn with my gear in tow. Drone, water sample kits, geological sensors, nothing too heavy, just enough to log the anomaly and get back before nightfall. The trail was barely a memory, the kind of path you feel with your knees more than your eyes. And after about 4 hours, I came over the ridge and saw the basin. It was strange. A perfect oval carved into the slope, maybe 30 feet across, edges too smooth for erosion, no inlet or outlet, just water sitting in a bowl of stone, clear and calm and wrong. There were no animals, no birds, not even bugs. The trees around the edge leaned outward, and the ground was dry, too dry, like it hadn't rained there in weeks, despite a recent storm that had left every other part of the range soaked. I approached the water slowly, set up the sensors, dropped the sampler, and took a picture. That's when I noticed something in the photo. Not in the frame, but in the reflection. A figure, thin, upright, standing on the far edge of the basin even though there was no one there when I looked up. I checked again, nothing. But in the photo, it was still there. No face, no detail, just a silhouette, distorted by the surface of the water and slightly closer than before. I should have packed up and left right then, but something about the place held me still, not with wonder, Not even fear exactly, but with a kind of pressure, like I was standing in the center of a held breath, and any motion would trigger its release. So I stood there watching the surface, and for a moment I thought maybe the reflection had been a trick, a distortion of light, a misread shadow. But then I noticed the shape again. Not across the water this time, but directly behind me in the image on my phone. And I turned, fast, spinning in a circle, heart thudding. But I was alone, or at least it looked that way. The air was cold despite the season. The sky clear, but the light felt filtered, like it had passed through something before reaching me. I tried to focus. Breathe slow, get back to the task. I launched the drone, set it to hover mode, and sent it straight up, hoping a wide aerial shot would give me some clue about the terrain, about the basin's formation. But the moment the drone hit 100 feet, the feed cut out, replaced by a screen of static and a pulsing tone I'd never heard from it before, low and wet. Like sound moving through water, I recalled it immediately, but the drone didn't respond. Didn't fall either. Just vanished from the signal. I looked up and saw nothing but blue sky. I should have felt the wind, should have heard the rotors if it were still up there, but there was only silence, heavy and complete. The kind of silence that eats sound instead of waiting for it. And the water behind me rippled. Not from wind, from underneath. I turned and stepped back, nearly slipping on the dry grass, and watched as something broke the surface gently, not violently, not like a splash, more like a hand rising slowly through fabric, pressing upward from the underside of a sheet. The water didn't churn. It didn't even spill outward. It just opened in a long, narrow ripple, and beneath the surface I saw movement. Not a form, not a creature, but a depth. Something below the pit that shouldn't have been there. A corridor or shaft or tunnel, maybe even stairs. Not carved from stone, but worn smooth, too smooth, descending into perfect black. I stepped forward without meaning to, close enough to the edge to feel cold lifting from the surface, the scent of something ancient and hollow rising into my nose like mildew from a sealed crypt. And then I saw the reflection again, this time right next to me, not across the basin, not behind me, standing beside me, still, silent, head tilted the wrong way. And as I watched, it breathed. The water moved with its chest, but the air didn't. I couldn't feel my own breath, couldn't hear my heartbeat, just the slow inhale of the thing not beside me, not in the world, but within the reflection. I don't remember deciding to step in. I only remember the moment my boots touched the surface and did not sink. The water held me like glass, unbroken. And then it folded inward around my ankles without resistance or weight, pulling me down as if gravity itself had been rewritten beneath the basin. And I wasn't drowning. I wasn't falling. I was descending in silence, slow and steady, through a liquid that felt like air pressed between hands, cold but not biting. And the deeper I went, the clearer everything became. Above me, the surface disappeared in seconds. The light faded into soft amber, then gray, then something close to the color of old teeth. And ahead, I saw the steps, real now, carved and ancient, leading downward into a corridor not of stone, but of something else, something fibrous and pale and veined like the inside of a living thing. I walked them without thought, my body moving as if it remembered a path I had never seen before. The walls throbbed gently, not alive but aware. And in the distance I heard no sound, but something shaped like a sound. The idea of a voice, speaking without words, pulling me onward not with command, but with invitation. And I followed. I always followed, until I reached a chamber carved in a perfect circle, lined with mirrors, dozens of them, all cracked, all stained, but none showing me, none reflecting anything at all except the silhouette. That same shape, thin and off, its joints too wide, its neck bent backward like a wet branch, standing in the center of the space, facing away, unmoving. And when I stepped into the room, I saw them all, the others, dozens of them, maybe hundreds, standing just outside the mirrors, not in them, behind them, pressed to the glass from the wrong side, eyes wide and flat and unblinking, each one open-mouthed as if caught in a breath they never finished. And then the figure turned to me and I saw its face. It was mine. Not exactly. Not now. But mine from before. Younger. Cleaner. Confused. Lips moving silently, eyes begging in a way that wasn't for help, but for forgetting. And behind its mouth there was no throat. Only water. Infinite and black and cold as everything I'd stepped away from. I tried to speak, but my voice didn't work. Not because I was underwater, but because there was no sound here, no air, only memory, only the weight of things unspoken. And then I was back on the ridge, coughing, shivering, drenched and alone, the basin gone, replaced by dry ground and forest so still I thought the world had stopped. But in my hand was the sampler I'd used, sealed, filled, and inside it wasn't water. It wasn't mud. It was an eye, human, unblinking, still warm, floating in something darker than blood, and when I opened my phone again, there were no photos, no notes, only one new voice memo time-stamped for the exact moment I stepped onto the water, and it plays only one thing. The sound of my own voice whispering from far away, whispering to someone standing just out of frame, saying, "Don't look down. It sees you now."